and this is where I worked.
These days, the last place you're likely to find Anthony Bourdain is slaving over a hot stove in a restaurant kitchen. But for us, he found the time. I watched as he reduced chaos to cuisine.
Is that the way Julia Child would do it?
Yes. I mean, butter and cream and alcohol and fermentation.
Oh my God.
Tony doesn't do much of this anymore. Now he spends his time hosting a TV show called No Reservations.
5 years ago, I was a chef working in New York City. Now, I'm picking my way through deep Malaysian jungle.
Leeches.
Not leeches. Call the show Extreme Travel with a side order of extreme cuisine.
What's for lunch?
I guess it's a squeezel.
Squeezel? What's a squeezel?
Tony Bourdain and a TV crew
So we're eating porcupine.
have been eating their way around the world for 5 years now. But back to that leech.
But let me tell you, making no reservations is not what you might think.
Bend over. I'm there to help out. When one of our camera people gets a leech on her butt, I'm happy to step in.
Clearly.
Chef, author, remover of leeches.
Great.
I did not eat that leech, by the way, in case you were wondering.
Well, let's put it this way. A leech is far from the worst thing he has put in his mouth.
Not bad.
From seal eyeball in Canada, raw,
It tastes like sea urchin roe.
to guinea pig, high in the Peruvian Andes.
I could serve this in my restaurant. I just give it a French name. They'd eat it.
What is the worst meal you've ever eaten?
The worst was with a tribe of Bushmen in Namibia that we did for the show.
Behold, dear viewer, the worst, most difficult, even horrifying meal of my life.
Warthog.
A
There was
warthog?
sand, crap, and fur in every bite.
How come you don't get sick more? I watch you on your show eat things uncooked. What about that seal eyeball?
I think by not living in a hygienic bubble, I have a pretty good resistance.
What is it with his stomach?
He's just always been adventurous.
Tony's mother, Gladys, is a copy editor at the New York Times today. But when Tony was a boy, she was a stay-at-home mom in New Jersey and an enthusiastic amateur chef.
He always had this interest in good tastes, good smells. From a very young age, he loved to try new things.
It's like boys with puppy dog tails and snails and icky things.
Oh,
Crawly,
he ate
creepy.
snails that first summer in France, too.
That first summer in France, visiting his father's family, a 10-year-old Tony ate his first oyster, and his world was never the same.
It was an early exposure to eating French that really resonated later. The power of those early experiences with a good oyster. You, in a very visceral way, you remember those things.
I mean, most little kids won't eat an oyster.
I
It
think
looks so squishy.
that I was the sort of kid who, if you dared me to eat something squishy, I'd eat it.
Bourdain says that daring to try anything once has worked well for him, and not just at the dinner table. Here he is skydiving with Elvis impersonators.
No reservation!
And nearly getting crushed by a dune buggy.
Yeah, I'm fine. I mean, here I am. I'm 50 years old, and I'm doing all of this silly little boy stuff. And I grant you, it's pretty undignified, but I'm having a really good time.
His latest stunt? Becoming Jackie Chan.
This is a scene we shot that we're working on in Hong Kong. Well, it kind of speaks for itself.
How's that taste, numbnuts?
His mother says, no surprise, Tony was more than a handful as a teenager.
For a long time, I was very, very seriously fearful that he'd wind up in jail or dead. But, saving grace, despite all the wretched behavior, he was home for dinner every night.
Well, he liked the food.
So,
Mom's cooking.
And I started enthusiastically taking drugs at around age 13.
At age 17, Tony got his first restaurant job dishwashing at a wedding reception.
The wedding party came in, and the bride stopped by the kitchen in her wedding gown, and shortly after I looked into the garbage area behind the restaurant, and there's my chef and the bride having sex. That
And you said, oh, okay, this is good.
that looked pretty cool to a horny 17-year-old.
And so he went to culinary school and learned to cook like Julia Child. He got a job in New York, but by then he had graduated to heroin.
I liked the idea of doing the most dangerous drug in the room.
He finally entered a detox program.
So this is like 6-8 years to get off.
Of heroin, yeah. You know, it's a pretty dreary, it's the least interesting thing about me, because, you know, there's only 2 TV movies of these stories, you know. At the end of the story, the guy ODs. At the end of the story, the guy gets better. You know, I got better.
And the end of the story was the beginning of the story, really.
I buckled down. I became a working cook and did the best I could.
He did the best he could at a bistro called Les Halles, a little bit of France in Lower Manhattan.
Les Halles, a real French restaurant,
As French as it gets.
He spent 4 intense years in this tiny kitchen where he finally got his life in order.
Now that is our frite, and we're rather famous for these.
Oh, man.
He was doing more than cooking. He was writing an exposé about the restaurant business that was published as an article in 1999 in The New Yorker called Don't Eat Before Reading This.
They ran that piece, and it became something of a notorious piece in the magazine, and suddenly everything changed.
The article was expanded into a memoir, Kitchen Confidential.
Cooking's work. This is easy.
On the bestseller list for 44 weeks, translated into 22 languages.
These 2 are from my son-in-law. You just made my day. That's his birthday present.
All right.
You say that when you're in a restaurant, you shouldn't eat fish on Monday.
Those words are going to be on my headstone,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think. When I wrote Kitchen Confidential, I was perhaps looking to goose people outside the industry with what everybody in the industry knew, that the fish markets are closed on the weekend.
So in other words, even if they say fresh, it ain't.
All I can say is this, is that at anything less than a really good restaurant, Monday's probably not your best day to eat fish.
He's not exactly eating his words today, but
You're backing off some of the things you wrote in that book?
When I wrote Kitchen Confidential, I hadn't been anywhere. And I've since found that so many of the best meals of my life have been in absolutely filthy restaurants with abominable bathrooms and pigs and chickens running around on the floor. So I do feel a little bad that I seem to have scared a lot of people away from food rather than encouraging them to be more adventurous.
his passion for good food and for how it can make the world a better place was recently put to the test in Beirut, where he went to do a show about Lebanese cuisine.
So we start to hear automatic weapons fire like a neighborhood away. And a few seconds later, the cars with Hezbollah supporters start to drive by waving flags and celebrating the capture, kidnapping of the Israeli soldiers. You know, we watched a country destroyed. Up to that point, I guess I'd begun to believe that everything could be okay in the world if we could all just sit down and eat together. I guess I'd come to think that. I'd allow myself to become hopeful.
Beirut was a serious jolt, but now, back in New York, he recently got a different kind of jolt.
Well, tell us about having a baby.
I live in a little pink world now. It smells of breast milk, and I'm really happy there.
Baby Ariana was born to Bourdain and his wife Ottavia in April.
Given the trouble he gave you when he was growing up, what kind of a father did you think he was going to be?
His having a baby surprised me incredibly, but I think, frankly, that he'll be a fantastic father because under all the cynicism, he has a mushy place that's very tender.
For most of my life, I wouldn't have been a good father. Too selfish, too self-involved, too messed up on drugs, and also afraid. The thought of being frightened for a child, I was not up to that kind of fear and responsibility. And I guess I just reached a point where, I think I'm ready to have a baby. In fact, I would be a good dad. I'm not such a bad guy.
No, he's not.
Oh, look at this, look at this. Oh my God.
And he is a very good cook.
What are we calling this dish?
This is a tenderloin of pork stuffed with bacon, larded with bacon.
That's a heart attack, everybody. That's a heart attack.
That's what Yule Gibbons said before he keeled over after a life of nuts and berries. Like I said, I'm not your dietitian.
Oh my God, that looks wonderful.